Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Sims, and I like studying the Bible and then sharing what I found with other people. So, if that's something you're interested in, you are in the right spot. I will go ahead and let you know real quick. You might notice that I do not have any video of myself today. I've been thinking about that, and I decided that it probably was something I should transition away from a little bit. And the reason for that is, first, it doesn't add all that much. It probably is nice to see my face, maybe. I kind of like the ability to see someone's face. But then I actually go around with the phone in my pocket most of the time and listen to something on YouTube rather than actually watch it. So it doesn't really add that much. It's not like, other than my expressions, you're not getting anything out of it. And I'm assuming most people who are going to pull up a Bible study video for 30 minutes or an hour probably aren't going to be actually watching it that entire time. Maybe I'm wrong on that. The other reason is that I find that I am not able to record as much as I want to when I try to do video, because I'm always trying to find a place that has a decent light and decent background and, that's just appropriate for video stuff. And it just limits my ability quite a lot, whereas I can grab my phone and start recording pretty much any time. So I'm hoping that'll help me get these videos out a little bit quicker. I'm like a month and a half behind from where I need to be right now, So we've been going through the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet to Judah. This is about 350 years after the time of David. Israel had already been carried off, the nation of Israel, because of course they had the civil war and the two nations, Israel and Judah, became two different nations. Israel was carried off into slavery because they had been bad. Judah was also being really bad, and Jeremiah was the guy who got to tell them, hey, judgment is coming. And the people repeatedly did not repent with all the warnings that they were getting. So, the last thing we covered in the last section, today we're going to be doing Jeremiah 5, verses 20 through 31. So what do we have coming up in this section? Well, we actually have a quote that gets, in this little section, that gets picked up by Jesus many, many years later, so that's kind of fun. We get some, speaking of the fear of the Lord, the necessity of that. What else do we have? We have a really weird bird metaphor. Something about trapping birds, which is kind of strange. We'll try to unpack that, figure out what that means. And, to me, a really haunting ending to this chapter, maybe the most haunting section of Jeremiah so far. Something that every time I read it just sticks with me and kind of hits me in the gut. So, lots of fun things in store. Before we get to that, let's do a review of where we were last time. What verses did we cover last time? We went from 14 through 19 last time, and taking a rather large view of it, it's a fairly generic section of Jeremiah. It kind of talks about the same sort of things that have been talked about several times throughout Jeremiah. Basically, God's saying, hey, you've rejected my prophets, you've specifically rejected Jeremiah, who has been saying doom is coming, and instead you're saying, no, doom's coming your way, nothing's going to happen to us, God's not going to do anything. God gets angry and is like, well, because you've done this, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to send judgment your way. He talks specifically about Babylon, saying that it's an enduring and mighty nation that's going to come, and it's going to eat up your land. It's going to eat up your harvest, your food, your sons and daughters. All of it's going to be consumed by Babylon. And yet, at the end of that, we have this little promise that says, I'm not going to make a full end of you. Despite all the things you've done, I'm not going to utterly destroy you. There will be a remnant, which we see mentioned over and over and over again. And he ends that last section with kind of an interesting thing where he says, when the children ask, why are we sent away into these foreign lands? I tell them, since we decided to serve foreign gods, God sent us out to go into foreign lands. Kind of like, if that's really what you want, have it. See how well you like that. So, with that, let's go ahead and read just this entire section, and then we'll come back and break it down verse by verse. Usually I like to do smaller sections, but this is kind of one big chunk. It doesn't break down real easily. So, verse 20. Declare this in the house of Jacob, proclaim it in Judah. Hear this, O foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but see not, who have ears but hear not. Do you not fear me, declares the Lord? Do you not tremble before me? I place the sand as the boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier that it cannot pass. Though the waves toss, they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot pass over it. But this people has a stubborn and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and gone away. They do not say in their hearts, Let us fear the Lord our God, who gives the rain in its season, the autumn rain and the spring rain, and keeps for us the weeks appointed for the harvest. Your iniquities have turned these away, and your sins have kept good from you. For wicked men are found among my people. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait. They set a trap, they catch men. Like a cage full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they have become great and rich. They have grown fat and sleek. They know no bounds in deeds of evil. They judge not with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper. And they do not defend the rights of the needy. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? And shall I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? An appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule at their directions. And my people love to have it so. But what will you do when the end comes? So I probably should do a disclaimer. There should always be a disclaimer that I do not necessarily know what I'm talking about. I try to research this, but I'm not an expert. I just spend my time in my Bible study and I'm passing on what I found. So take it for whatever it's worth. This time, this was actually hitting me when we were originally going through this, which was about a month and a half ago, where we were doing this in small group. I was getting a little burnt out on Jeremiah because it is a lot of judgment talk. And after a while, it did kind of wear on me. Also, I just happened to have some other things going on, so I wasn't able to get as deep into the Word and nail things down quite as much as I generally like to, so just keep that in mind. But I will do my best to explain this and exegete it as best as I can. So declare this in the house of Jacob, proclaim it in Judah. So this is a pretty good indication that we're probably dealing with a new prophecy here. The book of Jeremiah, whoever kind of put this thing together, just took a whole bunch of the prophecies of Jeremiah and I kind of just wedged them together. They did not make it super clear when one begins and another ends. But here saying, declare this in the house of Jacob, proclaim it in Judah, that would seem to indicate this is the start of a new prophecy. So we got a nice independent section to look at here. Hear this, O foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but see not, who have ears but hear not. So foolish and senseless people. Senseless not only in the sense that they don't have any sense, that seems to be a part of it, but also they're unable to perceive things. They have eyes but see not, they have ears but hear not. There was a discussion in small group when we went through this. Somebody brought up the idea, do these prophets, which it's often talking about the book of Jeremiah, the false prophets that come along, and them misleading the people, them claiming to be speaking for God. Anyway, one of the ladies in small group asked, did they really believe what they were saying? Did they believe they were representing God even though they weren't on his side? Or were they being intentionally deceived? Were they trying to mislead the people? And I think to a certain degree, yeah, they were genuinely misled. They genuinely thought they were on the right side. They had eyes, but they did not see. They have ears, but they did not hear. They were blinded. So we have this, which is an interesting idea. I think probably our gut instinct is to say, well, nobody would be genuinely misled, because we don't like the idea of people being misled. We like people to be kind of heroes or villains, right? Heroes or supervillains, where they can easily be categorized. And it makes us feel better when people are intentionally being evil and misleading people rather than being fooled. But the truth is, people can be fooled and do a great many wicked things. Now, if this seems unjust, like, oh, these people never had a chance, well, first of all, let's let the Almighty God sort it out. He knows better than we do and can figure out what is and is not an appropriate judgment for people. But with that in mind, there's a pretty clear and consistent scriptural teaching, which I haven't pulled up any verses for it, but it's often referred to as judicial hardening. And the idea is that everybody, and get this at the beginning of Romans, everybody has certain amounts of truth. No matter where you are, no matter what you've heard of the Bible or Jesus, everybody has a certain amount of truth that has been revealed to them in terms of the structure of the world speaks of God's might, and the nature of morality speaks to some sort of moral guidance, which points to a moral lawgiver. So God has given everybody some spiritual insight to some degree, and people have the freedom to respond to that or to reject it. And the more people reject it, the more they will be hardened. So it would seem, and this is something taught over and over and over again, think of the story of Pharaoh, where originally it says he hardened his heart to the words of God, and then towards the end it said that God started hardening his heart. So it's that idea of the more you reject, the more, in a sense, you will be rejected, the more blind you will become. You become numb to the truth of God. So these people seemed to genuinely think they weren't going to get in trouble. They seemed to think that they were genuinely okay, that they truly were unable to distinguish that the warnings from God were not actually from God. Sort of. I mean, they sort of weren't able to see that, it seems. But on the other hand, they had spent all this time rejecting it. So it's not like they never had a chance. It's that they had chance upon chance upon chance and became more and more hardened the further they went on. They were foolish and senseless, and they became people that could not see and could not hear. And I think that's a good thing for us to, that's a good thing for us to keep in mind for ourselves is, what have we become senseless to, numb to? Where have our, hearts become seared, our consciences become seared? What words has God been trying to speak to us that perhaps we just rejected a long time ago and we haven't even humbled ourselves to the point of saying, wow, maybe I missed something, So this verse actually gets reused by Jesus later. He comes back to this and calls back to this. The Bible is constantly referencing itself. The more you know the Bible, the more you'll see all these connections where biblical authors and God obviously inspiring it, in this case also being the person speaking, are echoing one another. So I thought this was kind of interesting from Mark 8, verses 14 through 21. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes do you not see? And having ears do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, Do you not yet understand? So I think there's probably a lot going on here, but I didn't have a chance to study this particular passage in any detail. I think leaven of the Pharisees tends to be referring to sin being mixed up with their truth, because the Pharisees had a lot of truth. They just mixed up with a bunch of oral tradition with the actual law of God. So he's saying beware of that leaven, the sin that they're mixing in with it. And I think the overall point is he's saying, I think, again, not having looked at this closely, but he's saying, look, bread isn't the issue here. I'm not actually talking about bread. I can make as much bread as I need to, I think is the idea. But tying it back to Jeremiah, it's there where he's trying to give them a metaphor about the Pharisees and the sinfulness of their teaching, and instead they're discussing, what about the bread? And that's why he says, why are you discussing that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes do you not see, or having ears do you not hear? And that's pretty much a direct echo of what we see here in Jeremiah. So kind of fun just to see different biblical authors and people in the Bible quoting the Bible. So hear this, O foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but see not, who have ears but hear not. Do you not fear me, declares the Lord? Do you not tremble before me? I place the sand as the boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier that it cannot pass. Though the waves toss, they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot pass over it. So, quite a question to start this off. Do you not fear me, declares the Lord? Do you not tremble before me? I think a lot of Christian traditions, in fact, I think I've been guilty of this before in teaching many years ago, but we hear the fear of the Lord and we want to softball that. We want to be like, well, it really means just respect the Lord. It really means just, caution before the Lord, of reverence for the Lord. And sort of, yeah, that's elements of it, but it's also fear. It's actually real fear. I think in here, do you not tremble before me? Trembling before me is more than just respect and reverence, right? It's something I'm pondering, and will hopefully have a better view of it when I get to the other side of this parenting journey. That I'm still pretty much on the early side of it, but a fear of your parent seems to be a healthy thing that you have to instill. I mean, you don't want your kids to be scared of you exactly. It's not the most fun feeling, and you don't want your kids to obey because they're scared of you. You want them to obey because they have good moral values and they choose and want to do the good things. But how do you get them there is the question. And when children are very young, as my children are, well, punishment is sometimes something you have to do. They need a little fear. They need to realize they cannot run over you. They need to realize that you are ultimately in charge and that you have power over them in a serious way, that you can take things away, that you can add punishments, that you do ultimately control them. And not because you want to control them, but they have to learn limits. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and that is an actual fearful fear I don't think we should be like, scared of God at all times, but in a sense of, we're in a sense of terror, and we are afraid of His judgment. As Christians, we are not under God's wrath, but there's still that knowledge that we should have that God does have wrath. God is, in many ways, a fearsome God. And it ties into, I'm very rambly today, apologies, I guess, but it ties into the idea that, being dangerous isn't necessarily being bad. Being dangerous can be a good thing. There's, just because anything that is powerful is dangerous and is in some ways fearful. Driving a car would probably be an example that everybody can relate to. When you first drove a car, you were probably scared. You might have been excited scared, but probably some level of you was scared, or was shortly thereafter you started driving the car. Because it is a fearsome thing, realizing I could run over somebody, I could get ran over, I could, have this, if I drive poorly, I'm going to get my ability to drive taken away from me. It's a big responsibility. And because it's something that can hurt people, and so much more. God is a fearsome person. So anyway, do not fear me, declares the Lord. Do not tremble before me. I place the sand as the boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier that it cannot pass. Though the waves toss, they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot pass over it. So I heard a couple different takes on this. Somebody suggested that this is coming back to the idea of, clearly we're going for like an ocean and waves and tides metaphor, right? So the question is, what does that mean? Some people have suggested that this is the idea of, God said His wrath wasn't going to completely wash over people, that He, in the last section, it talked about how He was going to leave a remnant. So saying it's kind of like that, like the waves, the storms only go so far, and then I limit them. There's only so far I'll let the judgment go. And maybe, but I don't actually think that's the central idea here. I think the main idea is closer to the opposite, or not closer to the opposite, but, I think you really have to have the first verse to get the whole thing. I place the sand as the boundary for the sea, a perpetual barrier that it cannot pass. So in other words, I put the sea where I want it, and it stays where I want it. It is completely in submission to my will. Though the waves toss, they cannot prevail. So it's almost like they can fight, they can toss around, but they're not going to win. They're not going to overcome where I want them. Though they roar, they cannot pass over it. So roar, you can have the idea of roar as being like a people can roar and protest, right? They roar, they cannot pass over it. But this people has a stubborn and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and gone away. So they do not, I guess I need to go to the next verse too. They do not say in their hearts, let us fear the Lord our God, who gives the rain in its season. And that kind of gets into the new section. But yeah, so the comparison is between the ocean, the raging, storming ocean, which stays in its place, and people with a stubborn, rebellious heart who keep going aside and have gone away. Now, some people say that the idea is still that, they're going away, but God's still in ultimate control. He sets those limits on them. Again, I don't actually think that's probably the idea here. I think it's a contrast. It's saying, hey, the ocean absolutely stays where I tell it, but you guys won't. And yes, we do know in the ultimate sense God is in control, but I don't believe that God is minutely controlling our every action. I'm not of the Calvinist or Reformed perspective. I believe he did genuinely give us free will, and we can genuinely choose to go against him and go away from him. That does not, of course, mean that we have overcome him, because whatever plans we make and go astray with, he will ultimately use for his purpose. And of course, he does occasionally just manipulate things and occasionally seemingly control people's hearts to get them where he wants them ultimately. But for the most part, I think this is a contrast. Like, the ocean obeys and stays where it's supposed to. Why won't you? I think is the idea here. So I think it's speaking to the rebelliousness of the people, and it's also kind of hinting to that, there is a free will here thing. You do have the ability to go astray. You are not like an ocean. Yeah, something else is that the sea has no reason to fear the retribution of the Lord, right? The sea doesn't have any reason to be like, oh no, God, don't smite me, and yet they stay in their place. The ocean stays where it's supposed to, but we don't do that. So, yeah, since it's again tying things into the fear of the Lord, do you not fear me? There at the beginning, and there right after this section where it talks about the ocean, they do not say in their hearts, "Let us fear the Lord our God." So I think that's probably also a fair observation. Is that it's the idea the ocean doesn't have to be afraid, but you guys should be. You guys, much more so than the ocean, are in a bad place. So something else that might be interesting. Something that I've recently become aware of is in pagan thoughts, there's a lot of concepts about this, like, ocean monster, that represents chaos. It might be reflected, I'm not sure about this, but a whole idea of, like, I think on old maps they'd say, here there be dragons on the edges of the map in the ocean. And the idea is there's some sort of monster out there, a chaotic force. And this is seemingly referenced many times in the Bible. Many people suggest that Leviathan is a reference to a chaos monster, creature of the deep. Many people have tried to make it, this, like Leviathan, a dinosaur. You can kind of make a case for it, but it doesn't work super well. It seems like any times it's referencing this sort of thing, it's trying to show God's power over chaos, whereas the pagan world usually thought of the gods as being subject to the fundamental forces, impersonal forces of order and chaos in the universe. God is saying, no chaos monster is above me. I control even the sea and the ocean. I keep it in its place. Might be something that's being echoed here, just a thought. But the people has a stubborn and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and gone away. Makes me think of my daughters. Actually, it makes me think my oldest one is more wants to have her own way and wants to argue with you. My youngest one, in some ways, might actually fit this better, because she is just going. She always wants to. My younger daughter has a taste for the forbidden. My older daughter just wants to do what she wants, and she doesn't care if it's forbidden or not. The younger one, if you tell her not to go do a certain thing, she has found everything in the house where she is not supposed to be, that she is not supposed to touch. And if she sees an opportunity to touch it, she makes a beeline for it. And if you start after her, like she likes running to the toilet, try to get her hands in the toilet, if you see her going that way and go after her, and she's barely, she's a very young child, she's only barely one, but if you try to go after her, she will like speed up and run faster to try to get away from you. So that's what I think of when I hear this. They have stubborn and rebellious heart. They have turned aside and gone away. Just every chance they get, they have fled in the opposite direction. Verse 24, they do not say in their hearts, let us fear the Lord our God, who gives the rain in its season, the autumn rain and the spring rain, and keeps for us the weeks appointed for the harvest. So let's go ahead and look at the next verse. The weeks appointed to the harvest. Your iniquities have turned these away. Your sins have kept good from you. So this would seem to be suggesting that there was a drought going on at the time, that God was restraining the harvest, or at least this has been a form of judgment he had done in the past, and I believe some of the sections we already covered have suggested this as well. In fact, I know they have. So that was one of the ways God was judging them. The term, the weeks appointed for the harvest, is something that I wish I would have taken some more time to learn. I know this is a reference to some specific things in the Old Testament that I'm just not very familiar with. Here's a comment. I'm just going to read this because I don't really understand it, but I'll pass it on to hopefully some people do. The Bible commentator Eliot said, that's his last name, the appointed weeks of the harvest, literally the weeks, the statutes, or ordinances of the harvest, the 7 weeks included between the beginning of the barley harvest at the Passover and the completion of the wheat harvest at Pentecost. So he seems to be suggesting, if I'm understanding correctly, there were all these different festivals and stuff that were associated with the different harvests, I think, and seems to be saying, God's the one who gave this all to us, not only the harvest, but also all these particular festivals and things with the harvest. Seems to be making association there. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I thought it was worth passing on. So it says in verse 25, your iniquities have turned these away, meaning, the harvest, the rains. They've turned these away, your sins have kept good from you. That's always a good thing to spend some time on and thinking on. Again, I think our very nice view of God, that's not what I want to say, our view that Christianity is always nice and we don't want to hurt people's feelings, I think can keep us from seeing some obvious things in the Bible, and that is that, a lot of times the reason you don't have some good things, I won't say all good things obviously, but sometimes the reason you don't have some good things is because of your iniquities and your sins. You've caused so many problems for yourself, and God specifically holds some things back from you. If we are going through struggles in our lives, we shouldn't assume that it's because of sin. Absolutely not. Good things happen for bad people, bad things happen for good people. I'm not saying that, but I am saying if you are struggling, it for sure is worth doing some introspection and saying, have I done something to anger God? Am I not walking with God properly? Have I brought some bad repercussions on myself? Have my iniquities turned away goodness from me? Have my sins kept good from me? That's definitely something worth considering. These words, iniquities and sins, might be of some significance. This is from Thompson, another commentator. The 2 words used here for Israel's breaches of covenant are common in the Old Testament, but may have some special point here. The first, Awan, this is the one associated with, what was it? Iniquities. So Awan, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, is related to a root which means to want or err. And the second, Hatat, or sin, the root meaning is to miss the mark. So what he's saying is basically one of these words, iniquities, means to err, and the other one means to miss the mark. And so his suggestion is that Israel had both wandered away from Yahweh, so they had kind of erred, they had wandered, which is more the idea in the first term, and they had failed to reach the goal, they had missed the mark. So they both wandered and missed the mark. So maybe trying to communicate both of those with some nuance in the terms there between iniquity and sin. Your iniquities have turned these away, and your sins have kept good from you. Verse 26, for wicked men are found among my people. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait. This gets into the weird bird stuff. They lurk like fowlers waiting and lying in wait. They set a trap. They catch men. Like a cage full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they have become great and rich. They have grown fat and sleek. They know no bounds in deeds of evil. They judge not with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper. They do not defend the rights of the needy. So a lot of stuff here. This is another section where I really don't feel like I nailed down what this means as clearly as I want, but I will try to parse it out as best I can. For wicked men are found among my people. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait. Now I can tell you right to start things off with, it's not super clear what this term even means. The translators vary a bit. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait is probably the most common one. It is the most common translation, something along those lines. Some versions say, as he that setteth snares. Young's literal translation, who tries to translate things very stiffly and as literally as he can, translates it as, it looketh about the covering of snares. So you can see how that might be a little bit, if that's the most literal version that people can come up with, you can see how it looketh about the covering of snares might be a little hard to translate into English. And people don't seem to be completely sure what's trying to be expressed here. So, wicked men are found among my people. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait. So, fowlers generally find some place to hide where they're not going to be seen, and they wait for their prey, or they do something to get the prey to fly into the air, and then they surprise them. Or if you're trapping them, same sort of idea, that you're doing something sneaky. So there is an element here for sure of something of deception, of hiddenness. These seem to be people who are more clear that they are doing wrong, presumably, if they're being deceptive. Again, how are they setting traps? How are they catching men? I'm just not really sure exactly what that means. But there is a predatory aspect to it for sure. You're entrapping other people. So that's not good. Like a cage full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. So, a cage full of birds, what in the world does this mean? I do have some thoughts on here, but I'm struggling with how to even get to them, because I'm mostly consulting notes, and I'm just not sure how to put it all together myself. A cage full of birds. So you've got a whole bunch of these people who have been caught together, and their houses are getting full of them, so they're profiting off them in some way. Therefore they have become great and rich. They have grown fat and sleek. So whatever sort of deception they're doing, whatever sort of way they're trapping and profiting off of people, it is making them rich and great, important people in the community, it seems. They're growing fat and sleek, which is a sign of health. They know no bounds in deeds of evil. They judge not with the cause of the fatherless. Okay, before we get into that, let me try to just break down things little by little. Here, this is something from Enduring Word. They lie in wait as one who sets snares. They set a trap. They catch men. And using the picture of the bird catcher, it is possible that Jeremiah had in mind those who steal men unto slavery. So that would make sense. It would be an illegitimate way of earning money. However, I'm not sure it completely works with the section that's coming up next, which seems to be a connected thought where it talks about perverting justice. It is more likely, but even in this Enduring Word commentary, they don't go with that as the primary explanation. It says it's more likely they had in mind those who use positions of power and influence to become great and grow rich at the expense of the weak and the needy. And yes, I more closely agree with that. I believe it's about abusing your power is what's being discussed here to pervert justice. Let's switch to verse 27. We get this weird thing about, like a cage full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. So what's this deal with a cage full of birds? Well, the cage seems to have the idea of the root word there has this idea of like weaving together, so it's probably referring to, say, a wicker basket of some sort. So this would be the kind of thing that a fowler might use to keep his birds after he's caught them. He's not seemingly killing these birds immediately for some reason, because he's wanting to fatten them up. You're wanting to feed them some more after you catch them to get more food out of them, if you can. So yeah, it's probably talking about wicker basket, but also it could be used as a trap. And there's also this association, some passages, I don't even think from the Bible, but outside the Bible, use this word in association with the concept of decoy birds, I guess to lure in the actual birds, which is apparently a practice in the Middle East to this day of using decoy birds to catch real birds, which I guess we kind of do that, at least for hunting. I don't know if we do it to catch birds. I know I've been watching that show Alone occasionally. I know in terms of one of the traps they'll make are sort of things that you can climb into and not climb out of. So maybe the wicker basket is suggesting that. not the wicker basket, but the cage might be suggesting something like that. The pulpit commentary has a good breakdown of some more details on what that basket might mean exactly. So again, going over this complicated fowler metaphor, wicked men are found among my people. They lurk like fowlers lying in wait. So in some ways, they're trying to trap people or be a predator. They set a trap. They catch men. So it's hurting people. Like a cage full of birds, they're profiting off of people in some way. And by harming them, not in a mutually beneficial transaction. They, like a cage full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. So they are collecting like bounties off of whoever they are harming. They are lining their own house with these things. They're gaining from deception. Therefore they have become great and rich. They have grown fat and sleek. They know no bounds and deeds of evil. They judge not with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper. They do not defend the rights of the needy. So here I think is where we kind of get a hint to what's being described here. I think what it's talking about is people who have some sort of position of authority, and they are supposed to be implementing justice, and instead they aren't doing that. Specifically, they're not doing it for the fatherless and the needy, those most vulnerable in society. They're allowing them to be the prey. Now, it doesn't tell us exactly in what form they are doing this, but that seems to be what they're talking about. These are the people, the men that they are catching, that they are preying upon, it would seem. And how are they doing it? By not judging with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper. They do not defend the rights of the needy. So what I think is going on here is I think it's probably referring to the judges of Israel. They had this giant tiered system where Moses kind of originally set it up, but you'd be people in charge of tens and fifties and hundreds, and I can't remember how high it went. But anyway, they'd be people who would be judging disputes between all these different people on all these different levels. And I think the idea here is that those judges were taking bribes. And who's going to be able to afford the bribes? Well, not the poor and the needy, right? So I think that's the suggestion here, that people were prospering off of bribes. They were perverting their judgment for the sake of lining their own pockets and harming those most vulnerable in the process, which is really, really tragic. Not tragic. I hate using the word tragic for something that somebody does that is evil. It's really evil. It's called spade a spade. So, they know but no bounds in evil. They judge not with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper. They do not defend the rights of the needy. Something else important to understand is the rights of the needy. They did have the need, those in need, the poor did have some, at least one, I think maybe some other things that I can't recall off the top of my head, but they had at least one way of where they're supposed to be getting special treatment, in that when the landowners would harvest the grain, or whatever they were growing, which keep in mind, landowners at this point would be just about everybody. But when they would harvest their fields, they would not get every last bit. They would intentionally leave a little bit behind. And when I mean a little bit, I mean they basically go through the first time and get whatever they wanted, and then they wouldn't go back a second time and do what they called the gleaning, where they get like every last bit. They'd leave the gleaning for the poor. So it might also be referring specifically to that. That's a right of the needy. That's something that was due to them, in the sense that the Mosaic law required them to do this. So, with that in mind, I need to go on a little bit of a social justice rant, because people... So there's this thing with social justice that has it's a left-wing political ideology, and it's come to pervert the church quite a bit in recent years, sadly. People have been deceived on this, and they think it's a biblical concept. It's not. Social justice is not in the Bible. That's not even a biblical term. Justice is a biblical term. In the biblical term justice, and I've studied out this word quite a bit for this reason, honestly, because I wanted to know, if I was missing something, and I'm not. Well, I'm missing many things, but I don't believe I'm mistaken on the fundamental nature of what justice is. And justice, mishpat, is just to render proper judgment. It is to give people, it is to rightly decide between a matter of dispute. It is to give people what they have earned or deserve. It's giving people what they deserve, whether that be condemnation or reward, either way. So social justice, on the other hand, basically just takes two groups of people and says there are disparities between these two groups of people, therefore that is evil, that is wickedness, there should not be disparities between people. That is an oversimplification of it, but it is a pretty good way to sum it up. So this often comes into, in this particular context, I know the social justice people would read this, and they would read this in terms of rich versus poor. They would look at this and say, these people are getting rich, and the other people are getting poor, and they're not taking care of the poor people. They are not helping them out and making them rich, and therefore that is evil, that is not social justice. Well, you're right, it's not social justice, but social justice isn't a biblical concept. Justice is. It's not about making people equal. That's social justice, a left-wing concept, not in the Bible. It is about justice, giving people what is rightfully theirs. So again, it's saying judgment was perverted, and judgment is not an issue of charity, it's an issue of getting people what they deserve, what they have earned, what is legally theirs, what is rightfully belongs to them, right? So, for instance, in these times, if there was a dispute about who owned what piece of land or who owed who money, then justice is not favoring the poor person and making sure that person gets more money. Justice is making sure whoever actually owes the other person money gets paid the money. Right. So God is not a respecter of persons. He does care about the poor. He does say we should be charitable to the poor, but charity and justice are two different things. They are not the same. So my point is, I got a little ranty there, but the point is, you have to actually look at the scripture in context. The context here is clearly talking not about people who just merely didn't give their money to the poor. It's talking about people who profited off the poor through deceit, through deception, through not honoring their rights. So that's how we should be approaching people. That is true justice, is honoring people's rights, whatever those rights may be, to make sure the right thing in a dispute and a judgment is carried out. It is not taking money away from the rich people and giving it to the poor, as the social justice people say. So very important to understand that distinction. It is getting blown up like crazy in the church. And if it hasn't come to your church yet, if you haven't noticed it in the people in your community, well, hopefully you have a community that has good sense and won't go that route, but you're going to see it in your larger Christian community for sure, if you haven't already. So it's also worth mentioning that, I talked about before how good things were being held back by God because people were doing wicked. We see the opposite here, and this is why you shouldn't just assume just because somebody's doing poorly that it's because they're not right with God. That would be, of course, a foolish assumption. It's something that those people should consider, again, be introspective, but you can't make assumptions because here we have people who are profiting enormously. They're getting rich, and yet they are not, absolutely not walking with God. They're doing the exact opposite of God. So even though it is, of course, sometimes God holds good things back from you because of your wickedness, that is not to say that it's as simple as, if you're doing well, God's blessing you. If you're not doing well, God's judging you. It's not nearly that simple. It's just something to consider. Back on the note of perverting justice, this made me think of Proverbs 31. So I'm going to read a little bit of this. The words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. What are you doing, my son? What are you doing, son of my womb? What are you doing, son of my vows? Do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to the one who is perishing, and wine to those in bitter distress. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouths, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. So, yeah, you see here, and this is just to show, yes, God cares about the poor, and yes, those who are most likely to be depressed when things go wrong are the poor. But it's not, nothing in here said, take your riches and give them to the poor, though there are other parts in the Bible that say things about radical charity, and I'm not downplaying that. I'm just pointing out that justice is about defending the rights of the poor and the needy. The rights. What is the right thing in the dispute? Judge righteously. Just have even measures, balanced weights in your judgment. Call a spade a spade. Whatever is right in a particular situation, whatever is just call balls and strikes in disputes. That is the role of a king. That is the role of a judge. That is the role of Christians. Not to slant things in the direction you think they should go. Just judge righteously. And do defend the rights of the poor and the needy when you see them violated. So yeah, and also it's kind of interesting that drunkenness is shown in contrast with good judgment. You need your brain on, you need to be able to think clearly, and you don't need to be concerned about just pleasuring yourself with wine and enjoying your life. I guess it's apparently, I don't drink, but apparently it's a lot of fun to drink and have that nice little buzz, but yeah, it's not what you need to do. You need to keep your thoughts sober so you can see what is right and what is wrong, to do fair judgment, to render correct judgment. Shall I not punish them for these things? I think we're finally ready to move on. Let me back up a little bit. They know no bounds in deeds of evil. They judge not with justice the cause of the fatherless to make it prosper. They do not defend the rights of the needy. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? And shall I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting phrase. We see this from God over and over again. But it's like, what do you want me to do? What do you expect here? What do you think is going to happen? I've got to punish you for this. I can't let this go on unchallenged. I also think it's interesting that it's not just punishment, which is more corrective, but it's, shall I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? Vengeance, at least as I understand it, is more of like, I'm going to take my pound of flesh. You actually owe me something for the evil that you're doing. It's not something that mankind can do. That's something reserved to God. Judgment, or vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. We can't take our pound of flesh for ourselves or on behalf of others. We can do justice, which might in some cases look similar, but we can't just, say, I don't like what you did, so I'm going to get you. That's God's job. But God's saying here, hey, I'm a vengeful God. It's coming. And finally here at the end, an appalling and a horrible thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule at their direction. My people love to have it so. But what will you do when the end comes? I think that's such a haunting last line, but what will you do when the end comes? Reminds me of like a hellfire and damnation sermon. What will you do when the end comes? I can picture a preacher just repeating that line over and over and over again, trying to warn people of the dangers of hell, or even their own, horrible decisions of a lesser degree sin. And that's something for us to ask ourselves. What are we going to do when the end comes? Are we ready to reap what we've sown? An appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. So what exactly is that horrible and appalling thing? The prophets prophesy falsely. Yep, that's pretty horrible. And we know a lot of that was going on. Ministers just not speaking the truth, distorting things, lying. And the priests rule at their direction. So when I first read that, I had the idea that it was saying that the priests rule. What am I trying to say? I had the idea that the priests rule at their direction was suggesting that the priests were ruling at the prophets' direction, which was kind of weird. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule at their direction. And I was thinking that meant, their direction as in the prophets that were previously mentioned. But that's not what it's talking about. That word, the priests rule at their direction, most literally that at their direction means like hand. It's the word yod for hand. And other translations say instead of at their direction, by their own power or by their own authority or by their own means. So in other words, they're like they're ruling by their own hands. They're ruling for themselves, just at their own whims, it would seem. Prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule at their directions. My people love to have it so, but what will you do when the end comes? I think this is another thing that's just really haunting, that we see the people that were supposed to lead the people of God were going the wrong direction. But is that surprising, really? I mean, I guess I wish I could say I wish I could say it was surprising that you would have prophets that would prophesy falsely. I wish I could say that. I cannot. I've seen plenty of ministers that seem to be prophesying falsely, saying incorrect things, and I suspect you have too. So it's not that shocking that it's not exactly the same thing as prophet, but same thing, or it's similar thing, in that it's somebody claims to speak for God and is not. And that priests would rule at their own direction, people would take their own power and abuse it. Is that shocking? In the name of God, is that shocking? I don't think so. Again, wish I could say it was, but I don't think that's terribly shocking. But check out this last part. My people love to have it so. I think that is the thing that is appalling and horrible. I think it's not so much just the people doing wicked, it's that God's own people loves to have it that way. I mean, look at the history of the Old Testament, New Testament, just about anywhere you will find people almost universally abusing their power. You can at best find a little stretch where that's not the case. But it's the rule, not the exception. It's not surprising, but the fact that God's people wanted that, they loved it, that's appalling. That is horrible. But what will you do when the end comes? Good question. So, I found as I am getting older, I don't really care what the world does anymore. Like the wickedness and sin they do, I guess I do to a certain extent. Like I care from a how is it going to affect me negatively sort of perspective. But in terms of the world being worldly and doing horrible things, it's just like, okay, whatever. What would I expect from you? Of course you are. You're sinful. You're rebelling against God. Okay. And I think we're seeing the light and darkness, if you have any eyes to see, standing in starker relief these days. But in some ways, okay, fine. That's who you are. You are a sinner. You're chasing after your own lust. You don't have Christ in your life. That's what I expect. I do care a lot more about what Christians are doing, though, and where Christians are sinning and going wrong. That concerns me greatly. I think this is a biblical pattern. I've actually forgot to include the reference here, but from someplace in the Bible, I think one of the epistles of Paul, it says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy and swindlers, or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. So, I don't really care about the first part so much, although it's interesting. That's not a verse I hear taught on very much. I don't know many churches that actually do that. But just focusing on the last part where Paul is saying, look, it seems to be saying the same thing I'm saying. We're like, okay, whatever. Those that are doing evil in the world, let somebody else sort that out. God will sort that out. But for us, we need to be regulating. We need to be keeping an eye on. We need to be trying to help and call out where we see evil in the body of the church. We need to be calling out that wickedness. I think that's where our focus needs to be. So the end of my video got messed up, and I had to re-record. And this time I am in a place where I can do my face, and it doesn't look too terribly bad, for my face. So congratulations, you get to see me. Yeah. Anyway, I was just about to wrap up and kind of just run through my big picture thoughts on this particular passage. me see if I can get the text back up. It's been a couple days since I recorded that last part. So yeah, the main thing that kind of came to me out of this section was to just sort of turn the whole thing into a prayer. It's obviously a condemnation of Judah, but I think there's a lot of lessons we can use to kind of look inside ourselves and really take evaluation of what we have going on in our own hearts and make sure we're not making the sort of mistakes that are happening here. Where it says you have those who have eyes but see not, who have ears but hear not. And I think, God, let my heart not be such that I can't see your truth, that I can't hear your truth and respond to it. Give me eyes to see and a heart to hear. Now, of course, we don't want to think about that as being ourselves. We tend to like to see those things in others, right? But that we should take that moment. Have we become callous to the things of God? Have we become like the ocean that's unable to, or unlike the ocean that will stay in its place? The tide will stay where it's supposed to, but we humans have a tendency of running off. We have stubborn and rebellious hearts. Have we turned aside and gone away? I hope it's more of an obvious things, but hopefully we're not people who are setting traps for people and catching them as prey. But, if we are harming people around us, become aware of that to not make our... at least that one doesn't really speak to me, because I don't think I don't think I'm profiting off of exploiting other people or harming them or perverting justice, but I do ask myself, do I truly have the fear of the Lord? I do say, have I been grateful for the things God has given us, the rain in its season? Have I turned away from things that I need, and have I turned away from goodness in my own life and kept good things for myself because of that? And here at the end, where again it says, an appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests rule at their directions. My people love to have it so. Have we become people who love evil, who love wickedness? I think of friends I've had over the years who straight up love wickedness. And, that doesn't seem to be an indication that the love of Christ is working in you if you love wickedness. We should not be happy when there's wickedness going on. Or, I guess that's probably a poor way to phrase it, but we shouldn't be satisfied. We shouldn't be the people encouraging it. We shouldn't be, when the world is going the wrong direction, when evil and wickedness is happening, we should not be content with that. We can be content with our relationship with God and content with the things that we do have, but we should not be loving the way things are if things are going to the world system, to a wicked system, things in opposition of God. And so, I think we'd probably all like to think that we have that heart, that we are in line with God, but are we? I just actually heard some research just a couple hours ago about how apparently people who think they have less bias are actually even more biased than people who know they have bias. So it's kind of a funny cycle where the more you think that you have surpassed your limitations in self-awareness, that you have truly evaluated yourself, perhaps that means it's even more likely that you haven't done a good job of doing that. So may we all stay humble and still keep looking into our hearts and asking God to reveal those areas where we need to improve. In many cases it's not difficult, but perhaps even things that we take for granted, things that we think we've mastered that perhaps we've missed entirely. So anyway, that was kind of where I got with this stuff. Anyway, hope that was a blessing to you. I always feel weird when I say that, blessing to you. But anyway, hope that was good, and hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.